She felt unwanted all her life, until one night made the millionaire obsessed with her forever. Before we explore all the details of this incredible story, tell us where you're following us from and the time. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss a thing, and let's embark on this journey together. She knew she shouldn't have worn the black dress. Selena Moore adjusted the thin straps on her shoulders for the third time in 5 minutes, her dark eyes scanning the opulent ballroom of the Plaza Hotel. The annual Tech Innovation Gala buzzed around her, a sea of designer gowns, tailored suits, and the kind of laughter that came easy when your bank account had too many zeros to count. At 26, Selena had learned to make herself small in spaces like these. Not physically, her 5'7" frame commanded attention whether she wanted it or not, but emotionally. She'd perfected the art of blending into expensive wallpaper, of being present, but not memorable. "You look uncomfortable," her colleague Janet whispered, appearing beside her with 2 champagne flutes. Janet worked in marketing at the consulting firm where Selena served as a data analyst, and somehow she'd managed to secure them invitations to tonight's event. "I always look uncomfortable at these things," Selena replied, accepting the drink she didn't really want. Her voice carried a soft Georgia accent, a remnant from her childhood in Atlanta that she'd never quite shaken despite 5 years in New York. The ballroom glittered under crystal chandeliers, filled with Manhattan's tech elite, celebrating another year of innovation and, more importantly, profit. Selena recognized faces from Forbes covers and LinkedIn profiles, people who moved markets with a single tweet, who treated million-dollar deals like grocery shopping. She didn't belong here, and everyone seemed to know it. "Ms. Thompson specifically requested your attendance tonight," Janet reminded her, referring to their firm's managing partner. "She said your analytics work on the Richardson merger was brilliant." Selena's lips curved into a small smile that didn't reach her eyes. Being brilliant was her specialty. Being noticed, that was something else entirely. Across the room, near the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park, a group of men in perfectly cut suits commanded attention without trying. Their laughter was confident, their posture relaxed. These were the kings of their respective kingdoms, and they wore their power like expensive cologne, subtle but unmistakable. "That's Adrian Smith," Janet said, following Selena's gaze. "Smith Industries. They say he's worth more than some small country's GDP. Selena had heard of Adrian Smith, of course. 37 years old and already a legend in international business. His company dominated 3 continents, and his personal life dominated gossip columns. Tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of classical features that made photographers weep with joy. Dark hair swept back perfectly, eyes the color of storm clouds, and a smile that had launched 1,000 rumors about which supermodel or socialite would be his next conquest. He was exactly the kind of man who looked through women like Selena, rather than at them. "He's launching some new tech initiative tonight," Janet continued. "Revolutionary approach to sustainable energy or something. Very sexy stuff for someone who looks like he stepped out of a Ralph Lauren ad." As if summoned by their conversation, Adrian Smith turned slightly, his gaze sweeping the room with the casual assessment of someone accustomed to surveying his domain. For a split second, so brief Selena almost convinced herself she'd imagined it, his eyes found hers across the crowded ballroom. The world didn't stop. Conversations didn't fade to whispers. The chandeliers didn't dim dramatically. But something shifted. Adrian's expression changed almost imperceptibly. His head tilted slightly, like a predator who'd caught an unexpected scent. His conversation partners continued talking, but his attention had wandered elsewhere entirely. Selena looked away quickly, heat creeping up her neck. She'd been staring. Of course she'd been staring. Every woman in the room was probably staring at Adrian Smith at some point tonight. The difference was that other women had reason to believe their staring might be reciprocated. "I need some air," she murmured to Janet, setting down her untouched champagne. The hotel's terrace offered blessed relief from the suffocating elegance inside. Night air whispered against her skin, carrying the distant sounds of Manhattan traffic and the faint scent of autumn leaves from the park below. Selena gripped the marble railing, trying to shake off the strange moment inside. This was why she didn't attend events like these. This was why she preferred her cubicle, her spreadsheets, her quantifiable world where variables behaved predictably and outcomes could be calculated with precision. "Running away already?" The voice behind her was deep, cultured, with the faintest hint of amusement. Selena's breath caught as she turned to find Adrian Smith stepping onto the terrace, his hands tucked casually into his trouser pockets. Up close, he was somehow both more and less intimidating than she'd expected. More because his presence filled the space like gravity, impossible to ignore. Less because there was something almost boyish in the way he seemed genuinely curious about her answer. "I don't run," she said, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. "I strategically relocate." Adrian's smile was slow, genuine. "Strategically relocate. I like that. Mind if I strategically relocate beside you for a moment?" Before she could answer, before she could think of a reason to say no that wouldn't sound ridiculous, he moved to the railing beside her, maintaining a respectful distance while somehow managing to make the expansive terrace feel intimate. "Adrian Smith," he said, extending a hand. "I know who you are." The words slipped out before she could stop them, and heat flooded her cheeks. "I mean, most people do." His hand remained extended, waiting patiently. "But I don't know who you are, which is considerably more interesting." Against her better judgment, Selina placed her hand in his. His palm was warm, slightly calloused, despite his obvious wealth, the hands of someone who'd worked for his success rather than inherited it. "Selina Moore." "Selina." He said her name like he was testing how it felt, and something in her chest fluttered treacherously. "Beautiful name. Are you enjoying the party, Selina Moore?" She could lie, offer some polite nonsense about networking opportunities and industry insights. Instead, she found herself being honest. "Not particularly." "You?" Adrian laughed. A real laugh, not the practiced chuckle she'd heard from across the ballroom. "I wasn't till about 10 minutes ago. Then it became the most interesting party I've attended in years." The compliment hit her like a physical thing, warm and unexpected. Selina had been complimented before, of course, but usually in the context of her work, her reliability, her analytical mind. Never like this, never by someone who looked like Adrian Smith. "I should get back inside," she said, even as every instinct told her to stay, to see where this impossible conversation might lead. "Should you?" Adrian's storm-grey eyes held hers. "Or would you rather take a walk through Central Park with a stranger who can't stop wondering what made you step out here alone?" The question hung between them like a challenge, like a dare, like the first line of a story that could change everything. And for the first time in her 26 years, Selina Moore found herself wondering what would happen if, just once, she said yes to the impossible. She said yes. The words had tumbled from Selina's lips before her rational mind could intervene, and now she found herself walking beside Adrian Smith down Fifth Avenue, her heels clicking against the sidewalk in a rhythm that seemed absurdly loud in the relative quiet of the evening. "I can't believe I just left a networking event to take a walk with someone I met 5 minutes ago," she said, tucking a strand of her natural hair behind her ear. She'd worn it in defined curls tonight, a style that had taken her an hour to perfect and would probably be ruined by the October breeze. "Technically it was 7 minutes, Adrian replied, his hands clasped behind his back as he walked. Even in the casual act of strolling, there was something commanding about his presence, and for what it's worth, I can't believe it either. You can't believe I said yes, or you can't believe you asked." He paused mid-step, turning to face her under the glow of a street lamp. The light caught the sharp angles of his face, emphasizing the strong jaw and the slight lines around his eyes that spoke of someone who smiled often, but worried more. "Both," he said simply. "I don't usually pursue women at business events, and something tells me you don't usually walk through Central Park with strangers." "What gave it away?" Selina asked, surprised by her own boldness. "The way you've been calculating escape routes since we left the hotel," Adrian observed with a grin. "Very thorough. I counted at least 3 different subway stations and 2 taxi stands you've mentally catalogued." Heat crept up Selina's neck. She had been doing exactly that, old habits from a childhood where being prepared for quick exits had been a survival skill, rather than paranoia. "I'm cautious," she admitted. "I noticed. It's refreshing." They reached the entrance to Central Park, where the urban chaos of Manhattan gave way to winding paths and autumn trees that rustled softly in the evening breeze. Adrian gestured toward a well-lit path that led deeper into the park. "Shall we? I promise I'm not a serial killer, though I realize that's exactly what a serial killer would say." Despite herself, Selina laughed. "Are you always this disarming?" "Only when I'm trying to convince brilliant data analysts to trust me with an evening walk." The comment stopped her short. "How did you know I'm a data analyst?" Adrian's expression shifted slightly, and for the first time that evening, he looked almost embarrassed. "I may have asked around after I spotted you across the ballroom. Apparently you're something of a legend at Richardson and Associates. The woman who can find patterns in chaos and make million-dollar predictions with frightening accuracy. Selina felt a familiar mix of pride and discomfort. Her professional reputation always preceded her. It was the one thing about herself she could count on, the one area where she felt truly valuable. Researching your targets? That seems very CEO of you, she said, trying to keep her tone light. Target? Adrian stopped walking, his expression serious. Selina, I want to be very clear about something. I didn't ask you to walk with me because I research promising business contacts. I asked because when I looked across that ballroom and saw you, everything else became background noise. The sincerity in his voice caught her off guard. Men like Adrian Smith, powerful, wealthy, with their pick of anyone, didn't usually bother with such earnest declarations. They relied on their status, their charm, their ability to dazzle. They didn't dig deeper, didn't look for the person beneath the professional facade. I don't understand, she said quietly. What don't you understand? Why me? You could have any woman at that party. Half of them were probably hoping you'd notice them. Adrian stepped closer, close enough that she could smell his cologne, something expensive but understated, warm cedar and bergamot. That's exactly why, he said. Every other woman in that room was performing. Trying to be noticed, trying to impress, trying to be chosen. But you were just being yourself. Do you have any idea how rare that is in my world? Selina wanted to protest, to point out all the ways she'd been performing too, the carefully chosen dress, the practiced professional smile, the way she'd positioned herself to be seen but not too seen. But something in Adrian's expression stopped her. Tell me about your world, she said instead. They resumed walking, their pace slower now, more deliberate. Adrian was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke, his voice carried a weight she hadn't heard before. Lonely, he said simply. Successful, profitable, efficient, and lonely. Do you know what it's like to walk into a room and have people see dollar signs instead of a person? To have every conversation calculated for what it might gain the other person? Selina considered this. She knew about loneliness, but hers was different. The loneliness of being overlooked rather than over-pursued. I know what it's like to walk into a room and feel invisible, she offered. Invisible, Adrian repeated the word like he was tasting it. I think I'd prefer invisible to being seen as a walking opportunity. Trust me, you wouldn't. They'd reached a small pond where a few late-evening joggers passed by, their breathing visible in small puffs of condensation. The city felt far away here, muffled by trees and the gentle lapping of water against the shore. Can I ask you something? Adrian said, settling onto a bench that faced the water. When Selina joined him, he continued, What made you say yes tonight? To walking with me, I mean. Selina considered lying, offering some safe answer about networking or curiosity, but the evening had already taken so many unexpected turns that honesty felt like the only option left. Because you asked, she said. Not demanded, not assumed, not used some clever line designed to impress me. You just asked. Like my answer actually mattered to you. It did matter. It does matter. Why? Adrian turned to face her fully, his expression intense in the way that made her understand why business deals and hearts alike fell under his influence. Because I've spent the last 37 years of my life getting everything I thought I wanted, and I've never felt less satisfied. Then I saw you tonight, and for the first time in longer than I can remember, I wanted something that couldn't be bought or negotiated or strategically acquired. What did you want? To know what makes you smile, really smile, not just the polite version you wore at the party. Before she could stop herself, Selina felt the corners of her mouth lifting. It started small, cautious, then grew into something genuine and warm. There it is, Adrian said softly. That's what I wanted to see. The moment stretched between them, charged with possibility, and the strange intimacy of two strangers discovering they might not be strangers at all. This is crazy, Selina whispered. Completely insane, Adrian agreed. I should go home. You should. Will you walk me to a taxi? Adrian stood, extending his hand. I'll walk you wherever you want to go, Selina Moore. As they made their way back toward the city lights, Selina couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted in her universe. She'd spent 26 years being careful, being practical, being safely invisible. Tonight, she'd been seen, and now she had no idea what came next. The flowers arrived at exactly 9:17 a.m. Selina stared at the massive arrangement of white peonies and eucalyptus that had somehow materialized on her desk, drawing curious glances from every analyst and junior associate within a 20-foot radius. The card was simple, expensive cardstock, with Adrian's name embossed in silver script. "Thank you for the most honest conversation I've had in years. A.S." Selina?" Janet appeared beside her cubicle, eyes wide with barely contained excitement. "Are those from who I think they're from?" Selina tucked the card into her desk drawer, trying to appear nonchalant despite the fact that her heart was performing gymnastics routines in her chest. "They're just flowers, Janet. Just flowers. Those are Takashimaya peonies. Do you know how much those cost? More than my rent, probably." The morning had started normally enough. Selina had woken up in her one-bedroom apartment in Brooklyn Heights, made her usual cup of coffee, and taken the subway into Manhattan while replaying every moment of the previous evening. By the time she'd reached her office building, she'd almost convinced herself the entire encounter had been some elaborate dream. Then the flowers arrived, followed by a text message from a number she didn't recognize. "Good morning, Selina. I hope you slept well." "I didn't." She stared at the message for a full minute before typing back, "How did you get my number?" The response came immediately. "I asked Janet for it. She was surprisingly cooperative once I mentioned I was the one sending flowers." Despite herself, Selina smiled. She could picture Janet's reaction, probably a mixture of romantic excitement and professional opportunism. "You're very resourceful, Mr. Smith. Adrian, and you haven't seen anything yet." Before she could respond, her phone rang. The caller ID displayed Richardson and Associates mainline, which meant someone was calling through the company's main switchboard. "Selina Moore speaking." "Ms. Moore, this is Catherine Wells from Mr. Adrian Smith's office. Mr. Smith would like to invite you to lunch today at Le Bernardin. Would 12:30 work for your schedule?" Selina blinked. Le Bernardin, the Michelin-starred restaurant where reservations were booked months in advance, and lunch for two probably cost more than her weekly grocery budget. That's very kind, but I usually eat lunch at my desk." Mr. Smith anticipated you might say that. "He asked me to mention that he has some insights about sustainable energy analytics that might interest you professionally." Clever. Adrian had found a way to make it about business, giving her professional cover for what was clearly personal. "May I call you back in 10 minutes? Selina asked. "Of course, I'll hold the reservation until 11 a.m. After hanging up, Selina sat back in her chair, staring at the flowers that had somehow transformed her ordinary Tuesday morning into something that felt like a romantic comedy. This was insane. She didn't have lunch with millionaire CEOs. She didn't receive expensive flower arrangements. She certainly didn't get swept off her feet by men who looked like they'd stepped out of Forbes magazine. But she also couldn't stop thinking about the way Adrian had looked at her last night, like she was the most fascinating person in a room full of accomplished individuals. "You're going, aren't you?" Janet said, perching on the edge of Selina's desk. "I'm considering it." "Selina Marie Moore, if you don't go to that lunch, I will personally revoke your membership in the sisterhood." "There's a sisterhood." "There is now, and rule number 1 is that when a gorgeous billionaire asks you to lunch at Le Bernardin, you say yes." Selina laughed despite her anxiety. "It's probably just a business lunch. He mentioned energy analytics." "Honey, no man sends Takashimaya peonies for a business lunch. Trust me on this." At 12:25 p.m., Selina found herself standing outside Le Bernardin, smoothing down the navy blue dress she'd hastily purchased during her lunch break. It wasn't designer, but it was new, and it made her feel slightly less out of place in the restaurant's elegant atmosphere. Adrian was already seated at a corner table, looking perfectly at home in his charcoal grey suit. When he saw her, his face lit up with a smile that made her stomach flutter in ways that had nothing to do with hunger. "You came," he said, standing to pull out her chair. "You made it very difficult to say no," Selina replied, settling into her seat. "Energy analytics, really. I do have some thoughts on sustainable energy analytics," Adrian said with mock seriousness. "Fascinating stuff. Revolutionary approaches to data modeling in renewable resource allocation. And do any of these thoughts actually exist?" "Absolutely. I've been thinking about them for at least 10 minutes. Selina found herself laughing, really laughing, in a way that felt foreign and wonderful. When was the last time someone had made her laugh like this? "You're terrible," she said. "I'm creative. There's a difference." The lunch proceeded with surprising ease. Adrian asked about her work, her background, her thoughts on everything from data trends to her favorite books. He listened, really listened to her answers, asking follow-up questions that proved he was genuinely interested rather than just being polite. "You grew up in Atlanta?" he asked as their main courses arrived. "Decatur, technically, a suburb. My mum raised me and my younger brother Silas mostly on her own. Selina paused, wondering how much to share. My father wasn't really in the picture. That must have been difficult. It was what it was. Mum worked 2 jobs to keep us afloat. She's a nurse now, finally got her degree when I was in college. I'm proud of her. Adrian's expression softened. She raised a remarkable daughter. You don't know me well enough to make that assessment. I know enough, he said quietly. I know you're brilliant at what you do. I know you're thoughtful enough to be cautious with strangers. I know you have a smile that could stop traffic, but you save it for people who deserve it. And I know you've been hurt before. The last observation hit closer to home than Selina was comfortable with. What makes you say that? The way you look surprised every time I pay you a genuine compliment, like you're not used to being seen as valuable for who you are, rather than what you can do. Selina felt exposed, vulnerable in a way that had nothing to do with the elegant restaurant or the expensive meal. And what about you? What have you been hurt by? Adrian considered this, turning his wine glass slowly in his hands. Success, oddly enough. It has a way of attracting people who want something from you rather than people who want to be with you. Is that what you think I want? Something from you? No, he said immediately. That's what makes this so... He paused, searching for the word. Terrifying? I was going to say, hopeful. The conversation was interrupted by Adrian's phone buzzing insistently. He glanced at it, his expression shifting from relaxed to focused. I'm sorry, I need to take this, he said, already standing. Emergency board meeting. Something about the Singapore acquisition. He signaled for the check, but Selina stopped him. Go, I can handle lunch. Absolutely not. Adrian, go handle your crisis. I'm perfectly capable of paying for my own salmon. For a moment, he looked like he might argue. Then he leaned down, placed a gentle kiss on her cheek that sent electricity racing through her entire nervous system, and whispered, "This isn't over, Selina Moore." As he hurried away, already speaking rapidly into his phone, Selina sat back in her chair, touching the spot where his lips had brushed her skin. She was in so much trouble, and for the first time in her life, she didn't care. 3 days passed without a word from Adrian Smith. Selina told herself she wasn't disappointed as she stirred her morning coffee in the small kitchen of her Brooklyn apartment. She'd replayed their lunch conversation dozens of times, analyzing every word, every glance, every moment of connection. The rational part of her mind insisted that a man like Adrian probably had lunch with different women every day. It was nothing special, nothing worth obsessing over. The other part of her mind, the part that kept touching the spot on her cheek where he'd kissed her goodbye, disagreed completely. "You're being ridiculous," she said aloud to her reflection in the bathroom mirror as she got ready for work. 3 days is nothing. He's probably in Singapore handling whatever crisis interrupted lunch. But her phone remained stubbornly silent as she commuted into Manhattan, and no mysterious flower deliveries awaited her at the office. By Thursday afternoon, Selina had almost convinced herself that their brief encounter had been nothing more than a wealthy man's momentary curiosity about someone different. That evening, she decided to work late to finish a market analysis report that wasn't due until the following week. The office was nearly empty by 7 p.m., just a few dedicated workaholics scattered across different floors. Selina found the quiet soothing. No office politics, no small talk, just her and the numbers that made perfect sense in ways that people rarely did. She was deep in a particularly complex data set when her phone chimed with a text message. "Look outside your window." Selina's heart jumped into her throat. She recognized the number, the same one that had texted her Tuesday morning. Slowly, she made her way to the floor-to-ceiling windows that faced the street 20 stories below. There, leaning against a sleek black car with his hands in his coat pockets, stood Adrian Smith. Even from 20 floors up, she could see him scanning the building's windows, searching. Her phone chimed again. "Found you. Come down." Selina stared at the message, then at the figure on the street below, then at her computer screen full of unfinished work. Every logical instinct told her to stay put, to finish her analysis, to maintain the professional boundaries that had kept her safe and successful for 5 years in New York. Instead, she grabbed her purse and headed for the elevator. The October evening was crisp, carrying the scent of roasted chestnuts from a nearby vendor and the faint smell of autumn leaves. Adrian straightened when he saw her emerge from the building, his expression shifting from anticipation to something that looked almost like relief. "This is either very romantic or mildly stalkerish," Selina said, stopping a few feet away from him. "I was hoping for romantic," Adrian replied, his breath visible in the cool air, "though I understand if you're leaning towards stalkerish." "What are you doing here, Adrian?" He looked different than he had at lunch. Less polished, more human. His usually perfect hair was slightly mussed, and there were faint shadows under his eyes that suggested he'd been working as many late hours as she had. "I've been in Singapore for 2 days," he said. 18-hour days, back-to-back meetings, sleeping in conference rooms, and all I could think about was getting back to New York to see you again. You could have called. I did call, about 20 times. I kept starting to dial your number, and then hanging up because I couldn't figure out what to say that didn't sound insane. Selina felt a flutter of something dangerous in her chest. What would have sounded insane? Adrian stepped closer, close enough that she could see the flecks of blue in his grey eyes. "That I haven't been able to concentrate on anything since Tuesday. That I keep thinking about the way you laugh when you're surprised by something. That I rearranged a $15 million acquisition timeline so I could catch an earlier flight back to New York. You rearranged a $15 million deal? My board was not pleased." Despite everything, Selina smiled. "That does sound mildly insane. I know. Trust me, I know how this looks. I don't usually—" He paused, running a hand through his hair. "I don't usually chase women, Selina. I don't usually feel the need to. But you're not usual. What am I then?" "Necessary," he said simply. "Have you eaten dinner?" The question was so mundane after his intense declaration that Selina almost laughed. "No, I was planning to grab something on the way home. There's a little Italian place about 6 blocks from here. Nothing fancy, just good food and wine. Will you let me buy you dinner? No business pretenses this time, no expensive restaurants designed to impress, just dinner." Selina studied his face, looking for signs of the calculated charm she'd expected from someone in his position. Instead, she saw something that looked almost vulnerable, like her answer actually mattered to him, in ways that went beyond ego or conquest. "Okay," she said, "but I'm walking there. No car service, no driver. Deal." They walked through the streets of Midtown, past food trucks and corner delis, office workers heading home, and tourists consulting their phones for directions. Adrian seemed fascinated by the ordinary rhythm of it all, like he was experiencing the city at street level for the first time in years. "Do you always travel with a driver?" Selina asked as they paused at a crosswalk. "Usually. It's more efficient." "When was the last time you rode the subway?" Adrian looked genuinely thoughtful. "College, I think. Maybe earlier." "That's tragic." "Is it? The subway is where real New York happens. All the diversity, all the energy, all the actual life of the city. You're missing out." "Show me," he said suddenly. "What?" "Show me the subway. Show me your New York." Selina stared at him. "You want to take the subway?" "I want to see the city through your eyes." 20 minutes later, they were descending into the Times Square station, Adrian looking like an anthropologist studying a fascinating new culture. The evening rush was in full swing, commuters streaming in every direction, street musicians competing for attention, the distant rumble of approaching trains. "It's so—" Adrian paused, searching for words. "Chaotic, alive." They caught the R train toward Brooklyn, finding seats near a window. Adrian watched the city blur past, occasionally asking questions about neighborhoods, about the mix of people around them, about the rhythms of commuter life. "You're really enjoying this, aren't you?" Selina observed. "I'm enjoying you," he said. "The subway is just context." The simple honesty of the statement made her chest tight. She was used to men who tried to impress her with their knowledge, their success, their clever observations about everything around them. Adrian seemed more interested in understanding her perspective than demonstrating his own sophistication. "Can I ask you something?" she said, as their train pulled into her station. "Anything. Why me? And don't give me some line about authenticity or how refreshing I am. I want the real answer." Adrian was quiet for a long moment as they climbed the stairs back to street level. When they emerged into the Brooklyn evening, he stopped walking and turned to face her. "Because when I look at you, I remember who I used to be, before I became successful enough to afford anything I wanted," he said. "Because you challenge me without trying to change me. Because you're the first person in years who seems genuinely unimpressed by my money and genuinely interested in my thoughts." He paused, his expression vulnerable in the streetlight. "And because when you smiled at me in that restaurant, really smiled, I realized I'd forgotten what it felt like to earn something that mattered." Standing there on a busy Brooklyn sidewalk, surrounded by the ordinary magic of evening foot traffic and corner shops, Selina felt something shift inside her chest. Something that felt like falling, like flying, like the moment before a leap of faith. "That Italian place," she said softly. "Is the offer still open? Adrian's smile was radiant. Always Selina Moore. The offer is always open. As they walked toward dinner, Selina couldn't shake the feeling that she was walking toward something much bigger than a meal. Something that might change everything she thought she knew about herself, about love, about the possibility of being chosen by someone who could choose anyone. And for the first time in her life, instead of running from that possibility, she was walking straight toward it. The restaurant was everything Adrian had promised, small, warm, and utterly unpretentious. Selina found herself tucked into a corner booth at Nonna's, watching Adrian attempt to twirl spaghetti while engaged in animated conversation with the elderly Italian owner who had insisted on personally recommending every dish. The scene was so far removed from the polished businessman she'd first encountered that she had to keep reminding herself this was the same man who commanded boardrooms and closed million-dollar deals. "Your boyfriend, he has good taste, Mrs. Rossetti said in accented English as she refilled Selina's wineglass. "But terrible technique with the pasta. You teach him, yes?" "He's not my—" Selina started, but Mrs. Rossetti had already bustled away with a knowing smile. "Boyfriend?" Adrian asked, raising an eyebrow. That escalated quickly. Mrs. Rossetti sees romance everywhere. Last week she tried to set up her grandson with the Uber Eats delivery guy. And how did that work out? "They're having coffee next Tuesday." Adrian laughed, the sound rich and unguarded in the intimate space. Maybe she's onto something. The ease between them surprised Selina. Over the past 2 hours, conversation had flowed from childhood stories to travel experiences to philosophical debates about everything from urban development to the best pizza in New York. Adrian had told her about growing up in Connecticut, the son of a literature professor and a small-town lawyer who'd been baffled by their son's entrepreneurial ambitions. "They wanted me to teach," he said, swirling wine in his glass. "Literature, like my father. They thought business was soulless." "Do you think it's soulless?" "Sometimes. When it's done poorly, when it becomes about power for its own sake rather than building something meaningful." He paused. "What about you? Did you always want to work with data?" Selina considered the question. "I wanted to understand patterns. My childhood felt chaotic. Mom working multiple jobs, never enough money, my father's unpredictable appearances and disappearances. Numbers made sense, they had rules, predictable outcomes. And now? Now I realize that the most interesting patterns are often found in the chaos, not in spite of it." Adrian's gaze intensified. "Is that what this is? An interesting pattern in the chaos?" Before she could answer, her phone buzzed with a text message. Then another, then a rapid succession of notifications that made her wince apologetically. "I'm sorry, let me just—" She glanced at the screen and her stomach dropped. The messages were from her brother Silas, each one more urgent than the last. "Call me now, Mum's in the hospital emergency room at Grady Selina. Please call—" "I have to go," she said, already standing, her hands shaking as she fumbled for her wallet. "What's wrong?" Adrian was on his feet instantly, his expression shifting to sharp concern. "My mum, she's in the hospital. I need to get to Atlanta tonight." Adrian's response was immediate and decisive. "My car is outside. We can be at Teterboro in 30 minutes. "What? No, I'll just book a flight." "Selina," his voice was gentle but firm, "let me help. Adrian, I can't afford a private jet to Atlanta. You're not paying for anything. Give me your brother's number." In the chaos of the next 20 minutes, Adrian making rapid phone calls while they raced through Brooklyn, Selina trying to reach Silas, both of them piling into the back of Adrian's car, she barely had time to process what was happening. One moment she was twirling pasta and laughing about Mrs. Rossetti's matchmaking. The next she was climbing aboard a private jet with Adrian beside her, her entire world tilted off its axis. "This is insane," she said, as the plane taxied toward the runway. "I barely know you." "You know enough," Adrian replied, fastening his seatbelt. "And I know you'd do the same for me." "Would I?" "Yes. It's who you are." The flight to Atlanta passed in a blur of turbulence and anxiety. Adrian made more phone calls, arranging a car to meet them, somehow managing to get real-time updates on her mother's condition through connections Selina didn't want to examine too closely. She spent most of the flight staring out the window at the lights below, trying to process not just her fear about her mother, but the surreal reality of Adrian's immediate, unquestioning support. "She's stable," he said, hanging up from yet another call. "Cardiac episode, but they've got her stabilized. Your brother is with her." "How do you know that?" "I have a friend who knows someone at Grady Hospital." Of course you do. Adrian studied her face in the dim cabin lighting. You're angry. I'm confused. Selina turned to face him. Why are you doing this? We've known each other for less than a week. Does the timeline matter? Yes. No. I don't know. She pressed her palms against her temples. This feels like too much. You, this plane, the way you just fixed everything with a few phone calls, it's overwhelming. I'm sorry, I wasn't trying to overwhelm you. Then what were you trying to do? Adrian was quiet for a long moment, looking out at the darkness beyond the plane's windows. When he spoke, his voice was softer than she'd ever heard it. I was trying to be the person you'd want beside you when everything goes wrong, he said, because that's what you've become for me, the person I want beside me. And when someone becomes that important, you don't hesitate. You don't calculate costs or worry about timelines. You just show up. The words hit her like a physical force, stealing her breath and her ability to maintain her emotional defenses. This was happening too fast, too intensely, too completely. Adrian, I know it's fast, I know it doesn't make logical sense, but since when has anything between us made logical sense? He was right, and that terrified her more than her mother's hospitalization, more than the private jet, more than the growing certainty that she was falling for someone completely outside her understanding of how the world worked. Grady Hospital's emergency room was a familiar chaos of fluorescent lights, antiseptic smells, and the controlled urgency of medical professionals. Selina found Silas in the waiting area, his relief at seeing her evident even through his exhaustion. She's going to be okay, he said, pulling her into a tight hug. They want to keep her overnight for observation, but the doctors say it was stress-related. Work's been killing her lately. Over Silas's shoulder, Selina saw Adrian hanging back near the entrance, giving them space while somehow managing to look completely natural in a hospital waiting room, despite his expensive suit and obvious wealth. Who's your friend? Silas asked, following her gaze. It's complicated. He flew you here in a private jet. That's not complicated. That's fairy tale level stuff. Silas? I'm just saying, whoever he is, he obviously cares about you, a lot. Looking across the waiting room at Adrian, who was now somehow engaged in conversation with a tired-looking nurse and making her laugh, Selina felt something settle into place inside her chest, something that felt like recognition, like coming home to a place she'd never been before. He'd shown up, without hesitation, without conditions, without even really knowing her. He'd simply shown up when she needed someone. And for the first time in her 26 years, Selina Moore felt truly, completely chosen. Yeah, she said softly, watching Adrian hand the nurse what looked like a business card while maintaining the kind of respectful charm that made people feel valued rather than managed. I think he does. The question now was whether she was brave enough to choose him back. Selina woke up in her childhood bedroom to the smell of bacon and the sound of unfamiliar laughter drifting from the kitchen downstairs. For a moment, she was 15 again, listening to her mother's voice mixing with whatever boyfriend she was dating that month. But as consciousness fully returned, the events of the previous night came flooding back. The emergency, the flight, the hospital, and Adrian's unwavering presence through it all. The laughter from downstairs came again, and this time she recognized both voices, her mother and Adrian. Selina checked her phone. 8:47 a.m. She'd fallen asleep around 3, after finally seeing her mother settled at home and stable. Adrian had insisted on driving them back from the hospital, then somehow talked her exhausted mother into letting him sleep on the living room couch to help with anything that might come up during the night. Now, apparently, he was making breakfast. Pulling on a robe over her pajamas, Selina padded downstairs to find a scene that defied every assumption she'd made about Adrian Smith's domestic capabilities. He stood at her mother's ancient gas stove, perfectly at ease in jeans and a borrowed t-shirt, probably Silas's, flipping pancakes while engaged in animated conversation with her mother, who was perched at the kitchen table in her robe, looking more relaxed than Selina had seen her in months. So I told the board that if they couldn't see the long-term value in sustainable infrastructure, they needed to expand their definition of profitability, Adrian was saying, sliding a perfect pancake onto a plate. Smart man, her mother replied. Too many people think short-term these days. No vision beyond the next quarterly report. Exactly. You understand business better than half my investors, Mrs. Moore. Call me Diane, and I understand people, which is half of business anyway. Selina leaned against the doorframe, watching this impossible scene unfold. Adrian looked so natural in her mother's modest kitchen, so genuinely engaged in conversation about everything from hospital politics to neighborhood gentrification. There was no condescension, no obvious wealth on display, just a man making breakfast and talking with someone he clearly respected. "How long have you been awake?" she asked, announcing her presence. Both Adrian and her mother turned, and the smile that lit up Adrian's face made something warm unfurl in Selina's chest. "About an hour," he said. "Your mother caught me trying to figure out the coffee machine and took pity on me." "That old thing is temperamental," Diane Moore said with a laugh. "You have to sweet-talk it into cooperation." "Like most worthwhile things," Adrian replied, his eyes finding Selina's. Heat crept up her neck. Even in her childhood kitchen, wearing borrowed clothes and wielding a spatula, Adrian somehow managed to make everything feel charged with possibility. "How are you feeling, Mum?" Selina asked, moving to kiss her mother's cheek. "Much better. Embarrassed about all the fuss, but better." Diane squeezed her daughter's hand. "Adrian's been telling me about his flight here. That was incredibly generous." "It was nothing," Adrian said, setting a plate of pancakes in front of Selina. "It wasn't nothing," Selina said quietly. "Thank you." Their eyes met across the kitchen, and for a moment the rest of the world faded away. The intensity of the look they shared was interrupted by Silas, thundering down the stairs, apparently following the scent of bacon. "Please tell me there's more of whatever smells amazing," he said, then stopped short when he saw Adrian. "Oh, you're still here." "Silas," Diane warned. "What?" "I'm just surprised. Most of Selina's dates don't usually stick around for breakfast." "He's not—" Selina started, then realized she had no idea how to finish that sentence. What was Adrian, exactly? "I'm whatever Selina is comfortable with me being," Adrian said smoothly, offering Silas a plate. "Pancakes? Okay, I like him," Silas announced, accepting the food. "Anyone who makes pancakes this good gets to stick around." "High praise from the pancake connoisseur," Selina said dryly. "I'm serious. These are restaurant quality." "My secret weapon," Adrian said with mock seriousness. "I learned from a chef in Paris who threatened to ban me from his kitchen if I didn't master the perfect pancake." "You're joking," Diane said. "Completely serious. Jean-Claude was very particular about his breakfast standards." As her family laughed and talked around the kitchen table, a scene so domestic and normal it felt surreal given the circumstances, Selina found herself studying Adrian with new eyes. This wasn't the polished businessman from the gala, or even the intense romantic from their dinners. This was someone comfortable in any environment, someone who could adapt without losing himself, someone who treated her family with the same respect he'd show his biggest investors. "I should head back to New York soon," Adrian said eventually, checking his phone. "I have a board meeting at 2. The announcement hit Selina with unexpected disappointment. She'd known this interlude couldn't last forever, but the thought of returning to their separate worlds felt like waking up from a particularly vivid dream. "I'll drive you to the airport," she offered. "Actually," Adrian said, setting down his coffee mug, "I was hoping you might consider coming back with me. Today, I mean." The kitchen fell silent. Diane and Silas exchanged a look that somehow managed to be both protective and encouraging. "I have work," Selina started. "It's Saturday," Adrian pointed out gently, "and I thought maybe you'd like to see my apartment, meet my world the way I've met yours." "That's a big step," Silas said, earning an elbow from his mother. "It is," Adrian agreed, his attention entirely focused on Selina. "But after last night, after this morning, I think we're past small steps." Selina felt the weight of 3 pairs of eyes on her, but most intensely, she felt the pull of Adrian's gaze, steady and patient and full of hope. "What would we do in New York, I mean?" "Whatever you want. I could show you my favorite bookstore, or we could walk through the village, or just order takeout and talk. I just want to spend time with you, Selina. Real time, without emergencies or business obligations or anything else getting in the way." The offer hung in the air like a question mark, like a door opening onto something unknown and potentially wonderful. "Go," Diane said quietly. "Life's too short to hesitate when something good comes along. But Mom, you just got out of the hospital, and I have Silas here to fuss over me. Besides, something tells me I'll be seeing a lot more of Adrian in the future." She looked meaningfully between them. "Am I right about that?" Adrian's smile was soft, certain. "I hope so, Mrs. Moore. I really hope so." Standing in her mother's kitchen, surrounded by the comfortable chaos of her family and the lingering warmth of the most surreal 12 hours of her life, Selina felt herself balanced on the edge of a choice that would change everything. She could stay safe, go back to her predictable life, file away this incredible interlude as a beautiful but impractical dream, Or she could take Adrian's outstretched hand and jump into something that terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. "Okay," she heard herself say. "Let me pack a bag." Adrian's answering smile was radiant enough to power the entire city of Atlanta, and as Selina headed upstairs to pack, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was packing for much more than just a weekend in New York. Adrian's apartment was nothing like what Selina had expected. She'd braced herself for intimidating opulence, marble everything, cold modern furniture, the kind of sterile perfection that screamed money but whispered nothing about the person who lived there. Instead, she found herself standing in a space that felt surprisingly warm. "This is beautiful," she said, taking in the floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a breathtaking view of Central Park, the comfortable leather furniture arranged around a working fireplace, and the walls lined with actual books, hundreds of them, well-worn and obviously read. "You sound surprised," Adrian said, setting down her overnight bag near the entrance. "I am a little. I expected something more." "Soulless?" He grinned. "You wouldn't be the first person to assume that. My decorator quit after I rejected her third attempt to turn this place into a museum." Selina wandered toward the bookshelves, running her fingers along the spines. Philosophy, history, classic literature mixed with contemporary fiction and business memoirs. She pulled out a worn copy of 100 Years of Solitude, its pages soft with age and frequent handling. "Gabriel Garcia Marquez," she said. "I wouldn't have pegged you for magical realism. My father's influence. He insisted that understanding business without understanding human nature was like trying to navigate with half a map." Adrian moved to stand beside her, close enough that she could smell his cologne mixing with the scent of old books. "That particular copy has been with me since college. And this," she indicated a small framed photo tucked between books, a much younger Adrian with an older man who shared his strong jawline and intelligent eyes. "My father. That was taken the day I graduated from Columbia. He died 2 years later." The sadness in his voice was subtle but unmistakable. Selina found herself wanting to comfort him, to understand the experiences that had shaped the man standing beside her. "He would have been proud of what you've built," she said softly. "I hope so. Some days I wonder if he'd recognize the person I became in pursuit of success." Adrian took the photo from her hands, studying it. "He valued integrity above everything else, said it was the only thing that couldn't be bought or sold." "Is that why you kept the books? To remember his values?" "Partly, and partly because this is the one space that's entirely mine. No board oversight, no public image to maintain, just me." The vulnerability in his admission made Selina's chest tight. This wasn't the confident CEO who commanded boardrooms and closed million-dollar deals. This was someone who still carried his father's lessons, who surrounded himself with books and memories in the midst of a life that probably felt overwhelming most days. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" "For bringing me here, for showing me this part of yourself." Adrian set the photo back on the shelf, his fingers lingering on the frame. "I've never brought anyone here before." "What?" "To this apartment, I mean. I have a place downtown that I use for entertaining, but this is private. This is home." The weight of that confession settled between them. Selina felt simultaneously honored and terrified by the trust he was placing in her. "Why me?" she asked. "Why now?" Instead of answering immediately, Adrian moved to the kitchen, an open space with professional-grade appliances and a large island that suggested someone who actually cooked rather than just ordered takeout. "Coffee?" he asked. "Real coffee this time, not your mother's temperamental machine." "You're avoiding the question. I'm considering how to answer it honestly without scaring you away." He busied himself with an expensive-looking espresso machine, the domestic routine somehow making him seem more human, more accessible. Selina perched on one of the bar stools, watching his hands move with practiced efficiency. "Try me," she said. Adrian paused, steam wand in hand, his grey eyes serious. "Because you're the first person who's made me want to be better than successful. You make me want to be worthy of the man my father raised me to be." The coffee machine hissed and gurgled, filling the silence that followed his words. Selina felt something shift inside her chest, like a lock tumbling open. "That's a lot of pressure to put on someone you've known for a week," she said finally. "Is it too much?" She considered this, studying his face for signs of the calculated charm she'd initially expected from someone in his position. Instead, she saw only honest uncertainty, the expression of someone who'd taken an enormous risk and was waiting to see if it would pay off. "Maybe," she admitted, "but I understand what you mean. You make me want to be braver than I've ever been." Adrian's smile was slow, transformative. Is that what this is? Bravery? Terrifying bravery. He handed her a perfect cappuccino, the foam art forming a delicate leaf pattern. To terrifying bravery, then. They clinked cups, and Selina felt the moment crystallize into something she'd remember forever, sitting in Adrian's kitchen, surrounded by the artifacts of his private life, acknowledging that whatever was happening between them was bigger than either of them had planned. "So what do we do now?" she asked. "I mean, practically. We live in different worlds, Adrian. I take the subway to work and you have a private jet. I worry about paying student loans and you worry about international acquisitions. Does that matter?" It might. It probably should. Adrian leaned against the counter, considering her words. "Can I tell you something? Yesterday, flying back from Singapore, all I could think about was getting to your office, finding you, convincing you to have dinner with me, not because of some grand romantic gesture, but because I missed talking to you. I missed the way you challenge my assumptions about everything." He paused, running a hand through his hair. "Then last night happened, and I watched you handle a crisis with such grace and strength, and I realized that all the money in the world can't buy what you have, the ability to love people completely, to show up when it matters, to be authentic, even when it's difficult. Adrian, I'm not asking you to change your life, Selina. I'm asking you to let me be part of it. However that works, whatever that looks like." The offer hung between them, loaded with possibility and risk in equal measure. Selina felt herself standing at another crossroads, another moment where the safe choice would be to retreat, to protect herself from the potential devastation of loving someone whose world was so different from her own. "What if it doesn't work?" she asked quietly. "What if it does?" Before she could respond, Adrian's phone buzzed insistently on the counter. He glanced at it, his expression shifting to one of concern. "I'm sorry, I need to take this," he said, already swiping to answer. "What's wrong, Catherine?" Selina watched as Adrian's face grew increasingly serious during the brief conversation. When he hung up, he looked genuinely apologetic. "Emergency board meeting. The Singapore deal is falling apart, and they need me there in person." "On a Saturday?" "International business doesn't respect weekends." He moved toward her, his hands finding her shoulders. "Come with me." "To a board meeting?" "To my office. You can work on whatever you want while I handle the crisis, and then afterward—" He paused, his eyes intense. "Afterward, we figure out what comes next." Selina felt herself wavering between the practical voice in her head that said this was all moving too fast, and the part of her heart that wanted to dive head first into whatever Adrian was offering. "Okay," she heard herself say, "but if your board meeting goes badly, I'm blaming the distraction of having me there." Adrian's answering kiss was soft, brief, and full of promise. "Selina Moore," he said against her lips, "you're the best kind of distraction I've ever had." As they gathered their things to leave, Selina caught sight of herself in the hallway mirror, hair slightly mussed from sleep, wearing yesterday's clothes, but with eyes that looked brighter than they had in years. She was falling in love with Adrian Smith, and for the first time in her life, she was going to let herself fall completely. The elevator to the 42nd floor of the Smith Industries building felt like a portal to another dimension. Selina watched the numbers climb, acutely aware of how different she must look from Adrian's usual Saturday companions. While he'd changed into a sharp navy suit that somehow made his shoulders look even broader, she was still wearing jeans and the simple sweater she'd thrown on that morning in Atlanta, clothes that had felt perfectly appropriate for breakfast with her family, but now seemed woefully inadequate for the corporate heights of Manhattan. "You're nervous," Adrian observed, his hand finding hers as the elevator whisked them upward. "I'm out of my league," she corrected. "There's a difference." "No, you're not. You're one of the most brilliant analysts I've ever encountered, and I've worked with people from Harvard, Stanford, Wharton. Adrian, I work in a cubicle. You run a multinational corporation." The elevator dinged softly as they reached their destination. "And today you're going to see exactly how much I need someone who thinks the way you do." The executive floor was a study in understated power, gleaming hardwood floors, floor-to-ceiling windows, and the kind of furniture that whispered rather than shouted about its expense. But what struck Selina most was the energy of controlled chaos. Even on a Saturday, the place hummed with activity. Phones rang, assistants moved with purposeful urgency, and through open conference room doors, she could see clusters of serious-faced people huddled around laptops and financial documents. "Mr. Smith," a woman in her 50s approached them, her expression relieved. "Thank goodness you're here. The Singapore team is threatening to pull out entirely, and our legal department thinks there might be some regulatory issues we missed. Catherine, I'd like you to meet Selina Moore. Selina, this is Catherine Wells, my executive assistant, and the person who actually runs this company. Catherine's smile was warm but curious as she shook Selina's hand. The flowers lady. I've heard wonderful things about you. Heat crept up Selina's neck. The flowers lady. I've never seen Adrian personally select flowers for anyone before, Catherine said with obvious fondness for her boss. He spent 20 minutes on the phone with the florist discussing the symbolic meaning of different blooms. Catherine, Adrian warned, but his tone was more amused than annoyed. What? She should know you spent more time choosing her flowers than you did reviewing the Morrison contract. Can we focus on the actual crisis now? Adrian asked, but Selina caught the slight smile tugging at his lips. Conference room B, they're waiting for you. As they walked down the hallway, Selina felt increasingly out of place. This was Adrian's world, one of high-stakes decisions and million-dollar consequences, where people treated Saturday morning emergencies as routine and spoke in acronyms she didn't recognize. There's a quiet office down the hall where you can work, Adrian said, stopping outside a glass-walled conference room filled with people in expensive suits. I'll check on you as soon as I can. Adrian, wait. She caught his arm before he could enter the meeting. Are you sure about this? Having me here while you handle something this important? He turned to face her fully, his expression serious. Selina, in the last week, you've become the most important thing in my life. Where else would I want you to be? Before she could respond, he kissed her forehead gently and disappeared into the conference room, leaving her standing in the hallway feeling simultaneously cherished and completely out of her depth. The office Catherine had directed her to was smaller than Adrian's apartment, but still more luxurious than anywhere Selina had ever worked. She settled behind the massive mahogany desk, pulled out her laptop, and tried to focus on the market analysis she'd been working on before her world had been turned upside down by emergency trips and private jets. But concentration proved impossible. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, she could see into the conference room where Adrian commanded the attention of a dozen people, his posture confident as he gestured toward charts and graphs displayed on multiple screens. Even from a distance, she could see the respect in the way others listened to him, leaned forward when he spoke, nodded at his suggestions. This was Adrian in his element, powerful, decisive, completely in control. And she was, what? A data analyst from Brooklyn who'd somehow stumbled into a fairy tale that felt increasingly fragile with each passing hour. Knock, knock. Catherine appeared in the doorway with a cup of coffee and a knowing smile. Thought you might need this. Thank you. Selina accepted the coffee gratefully. How long do these emergency meetings usually last? Depends on how stubborn the other parties are being. Adrian's very good at finding solutions that work for everyone, but sometimes it takes time to convince people to see his perspective. Catherine settled into the chair across from the desk, her manner friendly but observant. Can I ask you something? And feel free to tell me it's none of my business. Okay. What are your intentions with Adrian? The directness of the question surprised Selina into a laugh. Shouldn't you be asking him about his intentions with me? Honey, his intentions are written all over his face every time someone mentions your name. I'm more concerned about whether you understand what you're getting into. Selina set down her coffee cup, studying Catherine's expression. What do you mean? Adrian he's a good man, probably the best boss I've had in 30 years of corporate work. But his world is complicated. There are expectations, pressures, people who will judge you based on your background, your education, your bank account. Are you trying to warn me off? I'm trying to prepare you because if you hurt him, I'll have to hurt you. And I really don't want to do that because I already like you. The threat was delivered with such maternal warmth that Selina found herself smiling despite the seriousness of the conversation. And if he hurts me, then I'll hurt him too. Equal opportunity, protectiveness. They were interrupted by the sound of raised voices from the conference room. Through the glass walls, Selina could see Adrian standing at the head of the table, his expression more intense than she'd ever seen it. A woman, elegantly dressed, with perfectly styled blonde hair and an expression of barely contained frustration, was gesturing sharply, clearly disagreeing with whatever Adrian had proposed. Stella Palmer, Catherine said, following Selina's gaze, Senior Vice President of Strategic Development. She's been questioning Adrian's leadership lately, thinks he's too impulsive to be making decisions about international expansion. Is she right? About Adrian being impulsive? Absolutely not. About Adrian making questionable decisions lately. Catherine's smile was sly. Well, flying to Atlanta on a Tuesday night to chase after a woman he'd just met might qualify as questionable, but it's the best kind of questionable, if you ask me. The meeting continued for another hour, with Selina pretending to work while actually watching Adrian navigate what was clearly a complex web of personalities and competing interests. She found herself impressed by his patience, his ability to listen to multiple perspectives before responding, the way he managed to project authority without arrogance. When the conference room finally emptied, Adrian looked exhausted but victorious. He found Selina in the borrowed office, loosening his tie as he sank into the chair across from her. "Crisis averted?" she asked. "For now. We restructured the deal terms, gave Singapore some additional regulatory guarantees, and convinced our board that international expansion is worth the short-term risk." He rubbed his temples. "Stella's still being difficult, but that's nothing new. Catherine mentioned she doesn't think you're qualified to run the company. Stella thinks anyone who takes risks outside her carefully calculated parameters is reckless. Don't worry about her." But Selina was worrying, though not about Stella Palmer specifically. Watching Adrian in action had driven home just how different their worlds really were. He made decisions that affected thousands of employees and millions of dollars. She analyzed data and made recommendations that might influence quarterly projections. "What's wrong?" Adrian asked, his expression concerned. "Nothing, this is a lot to process. The meeting, all of it. Your apartment, your office, the way people look at you like you can solve any problem. It's impressive and intimidating, and I'm not sure where I fit in any of it." Adrian leaned forward, his grey eyes serious. "You fit right here, Selina. With me. Everything else is just details." "Are they, though? Details, I mean. What happens when the novelty wears off, and you realize that I don't belong in conference rooms and charity galas? What happens when people like Stella start questioning your judgment because you're dating someone who doesn't have an Ivy League degree or a trust fund? Then I remind them that my personal life is none of their concern, and that the woman I'm falling in love with is worth more than all their calculated strategies and corporate politics combined." The words hit her like a physical force, stealing her breath and her ability to maintain her emotional defenses. "Adrian, I love you, Selina," he said simply. "I know it's fast, I know it's complicated, I know it probably sounds insane, but I love your intelligence, your strength, your loyalty to your family, the way you make me want to be better than I was yesterday. I love that you challenge me and comfort me and make me laugh, even when everything else feels overwhelming." He stood up, moving around the desk, to kneel beside her chair, taking her hands in his. "I don't care about board members or social expectations or what anyone else thinks about us. I only care about you. About us, about building something real together." Selina looked down at their joined hands, at this powerful man kneeling beside her in his expensive office, declaring his love like it was the most natural thing in the world. "What if I can't handle your world?" she whispered. "What if my world can't handle how incredible you are?" he countered. "What if we stop worrying about what if and start focusing on what is?" "And what is?" Adrian's smile was tender, certain. "What is that I love you. And I think maybe you love me too." Selina felt tears prick her eyes, not from sadness but from the overwhelming realization that she did love him. Completely, terrifyingly, irrevocably. "Yeah," she whispered. "I think maybe I do." When Adrian kissed her in that borrowed office high above Manhattan, with the afternoon sun streaming through the windows and the sounds of the city far below, Selina finally understood what it meant to be chosen by someone who saw her exactly as she was, and loved her not despite her differences from his world, but because of them. The future was still uncertain, still full of obstacles and challenges she couldn't yet imagine. But for the first time in her life, she was ready to face them with someone who loved her enough to kneel beside her chair and promise that whatever came next, they'd handle it together. The call came at 6:47 a.m. on Monday morning, jarring Selina awake in Adrian's bed. She'd spent Sunday in a haze of domestic bliss, making breakfast together, reading books curled up on his couch, taking a long walk through Central Park, where Adrian seemed to know every vendor and street musician by name. It had felt surreal and perfect, like playing house in someone else's beautiful life. Now, with her phone buzzing insistently against the nightstand, reality was crashing back in. "Selina?" Janet's voice was tight with anxiety. "Where are you? Ms. Thompson wants to see you in her office now." Selina sat up, instantly alert. Janka Thompson, the managing partner at Richardson & Associates, didn't typically request Monday morning meetings unless someone was in serious trouble. "What time is it?" Adrian mumbled from beside her, his arm tightening around her waist. "Almost 7, Selina whispered, then spoke into the phone. "What's this about, Janet?" "I don't know, but she looked serious, very serious. And there's been some gossip about you leaving work Friday with flowers, then not showing up today. It's Monday morning, Janet. The day hasn't even started. She wants you here by 8. And Selina, you might want to prepare some explanations." After hanging up, Selina found Adrian watching her with concern. In the early morning light filtering through his bedroom windows, he looked younger, more vulnerable than the commanding CEO she'd watched in action over the weekend. "Work emergency?" he asked. "I think I'm about to be fired." Adrian sat up fully, instantly focused. "What? Why?" "Because I disappeared Friday afternoon with expensive flowers from a client, then didn't show up for work over the weekend." Selina was already moving toward the bathroom, her mind racing through possible explanations that wouldn't sound completely insane. "Because I've been living in a fairy tale for 3 days and forgot that I have a real life with real responsibilities." "Selina, wait!" Adrian caught her hand as she passed the bed. "Richardson and Associates. They're one of our consulting partners. If your boss is giving you trouble because of me, I can make a call." "No." The word came out sharper than she'd intended. "Absolutely not. I will not have you solving my professional problems with phone calls and influence." That's exactly what I was afraid would happen. Adrian's expression shifted, hurt flickering across his features. "I was just trying to help." "I know, but I need to handle this myself." An hour later, Selina sat across from Janka Thompson's desk, feeling like a student called to the principal's office. Her boss was a formidable woman in her 50s, known for her brilliant analytical mind and her zero tolerance for anything that might compromise the firm's reputation. "I'll be direct, Selina," Janka said, not bothering with pleasantries. "There are rumors circulating about your relationship with Adrian Smith, rumors that suggest you may have used company events and client connections for personal gain." Selina's stomach dropped. "Ms. Thompson, I can explain." "Can you? Because what I'm hearing is that you've been receiving expensive gifts at the office, taking personal calls during work hours, and now you're apparently spending weekends at his apartment." Patricia leaned back in her chair. "Help me understand how this looks from a professional standpoint." "It looks bad," Selina admitted, "but it's not what you think. I didn't pursue Mr. Smith for professional reasons. We met at the Tech Innovation Gala, and anything that's happened since has been entirely personal. Personal relationships with clients create conflicts of interest, Selina. You know this. Smith Industries isn't my client. They're a consulting partner, which makes it worse, not better. If Adrian Smith influences our partnership agreements because of his personal feelings for you, or if our competitors suggest that we're trading sexual favors for business advantages, this firm's reputation suffers." The crude implication hit Selina like a slap. Heat flooded her cheeks, followed immediately by a wave of angry defensiveness. "That's not what this is," she said quietly. "Then what is it?" Before Selina could answer, Janka's assistant knocked on the door. "Ms. Thompson, I'm sorry to interrupt, but Adrian Smith is here to see you. He says it's urgent." Selina's blood turned to ice. Through the glass walls of Janka's office, she could see Adrian in the reception area, looking every inch the powerful CEO in his charcoal suit and determined expression. "Send him in," Janka said, her eyebrows raised with interest. "Miss Thompson, please don't—" Selina started, but Adrian was already striding into the office, his presence immediately commanding the space. "Ms. Thompson, thank you for seeing me without an appointment." His voice was professional, courteous, but Selina could see the steel underneath. "I understand there may be some concerns about my relationship with Ms. Moore." "Mr. Smith," Patricia replied coolly, "how convenient that you're here. Perhaps you can help clarify the nature of your association with one of our employees." Adrian's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "My relationship with Selina is personal and has nothing to do with business. I'm here to ensure that she faces no professional consequences for my pursuit of her." "Your pursuit of her?" Janka's tone suggested she found the phrasing interesting. "Yes. I approached Selina at a social event. I asked her to dinner. I sent her flowers, and I convinced her to spend the weekend with me. At no point did she solicit my attention or use her professional position inappropriately." Selina wanted to disappear into the floor. This was exactly what she'd feared. Adrian riding in like some corporate knight in shining armor, using his influence to solve her problems. That's very gallant, Mr. Smith, Janka said, but it doesn't address the fundamental issue. Selina's position here requires absolute integrity. If clients or partners believe she can be influenced by personal relationships, then perhaps those clients and partners should examine their own assumptions about professional women, Adrian interrupted, his tone growing sharper. Selina Moore is one of the most brilliant analysts I've encountered in 15 years of business. If your firm can't recognize her value independent of her personal life, perhaps she deserves better. The threat was subtle, but unmistakable. Janka's expression hardened. Are you suggesting that our partnership depends on how we handle this situation, Mr. Smith? I'm suggesting that any firm that would punish an exceptional employee for being pursued by someone who appreciates her intelligence and integrity doesn't deserve her talent. Stop! Selina's voice cut through the tension like a blade. Both Adrian and Janka turned to look at her, and she stood up, her hands trembling with anger and humiliation. Just stop! She looked at Adrian, her heart breaking even as fury burned in her chest. This is exactly what I was afraid of. You can't just swoop in and fix my life every time there's a problem. You can't use your money and influence to make my challenges disappear. Selina, you were just making it worse. She turned to Janka. Ms. Thompson, Mr. Smith and I will no longer be seeing each other. Whatever personal relationship existed is over as of right now. I hope that addresses your concerns about conflicts of interest. The lie tasted like ash in her mouth, but she forced herself to maintain eye contact with her boss while carefully avoiding Adrian's gaze. Selina, Adrian's voice was quiet, stunned. Thank you for coming by, Mr. Smith, she said formally, but as I said, there's no longer any personal relationship to discuss. The silence that followed was deafening. Janka looked between them with sharp interest, clearly recognizing the emotional undercurrents in the room. Well, Janka said finally, I think that resolves the matter quite clearly. Mr. Smith, thank you for your time. Adrian stood frozen for a moment, his expression shifting from confusion to hurt to something that looked dangerously close to anger. Of course, he said finally, his voice carefully controlled. Ms. Thompson, Ms. Moore. He left without another word, his footsteps echoing down the hallway. Selina remained standing, her nails digging into her palms as she fought to maintain her composure. Sit down, Selina, Janka said, not unkindly. Selina sank into her chair, feeling like she'd just thrown away the best thing that had ever happened to her. That was either very smart or very stupid, Janka observed. I'm not sure which. It was necessary. Was it? Because from where I'm sitting, it looked like a man who's genuinely in love with you just tried to protect your career, and you threw it back in his face to prove a point about independence. Selina looked up sharply. I thought you were concerned about conflicts of interest. I was. I am. But I'm also not blind, and I'm not stupid. Janka leaned forward. That man didn't come here to leverage business relationships. He came here because he was afraid you were being punished for his feelings, and he wanted to take responsibility for his own actions. It doesn't matter. My career has to come first. Does it? Because the career you're so worried about protecting just watched you lie to save face, and frankly, I'm not impressed with your judgment. The words hit like a physical blow. Ms. Thompson, go home, Selina. Take the day to think about what you actually want out of life. Because right now you look like someone who just chose pride over love, and that's not the kind of decision-making I want to see from my best analysts. Walking out of the building into the bright Monday morning, Selina felt like she was moving through a dream. Her phone was already buzzing with text messages, probably Adrian, possibly Janet, maybe even her mother checking on how her weekend had gone. She turned the phone off without looking at any of them. For the first time in her adult life, Selina Moore had no idea what came next. She'd chosen safety over risk, independence over love, familiar loneliness over uncertain happiness. And as she walked through the streets of Manhattan, surrounded by the Monday morning rush of people heading confidently toward their destinations, she wondered if she'd just made the biggest mistake of her life. 3 weeks of silence. Selina had counted every day, every hour, every moment since she'd walked out of Janka's office and effectively ended the most important relationship of her life. She'd thrown herself into work with a desperation that bordered on obsession, staying late every night, accepting every project, analyzing data until her eyes burned and her head pounded. It didn't help. Nothing helped. The flowers had stopped coming after the first week. The text messages had stopped after the second. By the third week, even Catherine Wells had stopped calling to check on her, though she'd left a voicemail that Selina had played so many times she could recite it from memory. Honey, I don't know what happened between you and Adrian, but that man is miserable, and frankly, so are you if Janet's reports are accurate. Sometimes pride is just fear wearing a fancy outfit. Now, on a rainy Thursday evening in November, Selina sat in her empty apartment staring at the latest market analysis reports, seeing numbers but not understanding them, her mind consistently drifting to storm-grey eyes and the memory of hands that had held her like she was precious. Her phone rang, startling her from her reverie. Janet's name flashed on the screen. "Are you watching the news?" Janet asked without preamble. "No. Why?" "Turn on Channel 7, now." Selina fumbled for the remote, her heart suddenly racing without understanding why. The local news flickered to life, showing a familiar face behind a podium. Adrian, looking somehow both powerful and exhausted, addressing a room full of reporters. "Effective immediately, I'll be stepping down as CEO of Smith Industries to focus on new ventures that align more closely with my personal values," Adrian was saying. "The board will be conducting a search for my replacement over the next 60 days. Selina's hand flew to her mouth. She turned up the volume, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Mr. Smith," a reporter called out, "sources suggest this decision is related to recent personal upheavals. Can you comment on whether your relationship status influenced this choice?" Adrian's jaw tightened, almost imperceptibly. "My personal life has always been separate from my business decisions. However, recent events have clarified what's truly important to me, and I've realized that success without authenticity is just elaborate emptiness." "What will you do next?" another reporter asked. "I'm launching a sustainable energy consulting firm focused on helping mid-size companies transition to renewable resources. It's work that matters, work that makes a difference beyond profit margins." "And the rumors about Selina Moore?" The question hit like a physical blow. Selina watched Adrian's expression shift, something raw and painful flickering across his features, before he regained his composure. "I have nothing but respect for Ms. Moore," he said quietly. "She's an exceptional analyst and an even more exceptional person. Any suggestions otherwise are both inaccurate and inappropriate." The press conference continued, but Selina had stopped hearing the words. Adrian was giving up everything, his company, his position, his entire corporate empire, to build something new, something that mattered to him personally, and he was doing it alone. Her phone rang again. This time it was Silas. "Tell me you're watching the news," he said without greeting. "I'm watching." "Selina, that man just gave up a multi-billion-dollar company. For you. He didn't do it for me. He said it himself. It's about his personal values. Don't be stupid. He's starting over because you made him realize that having everything means nothing if you can't share it with the person you love." "Silas, Mom wants to talk to you." Before Selina could protest, her mother's voice came through the phone, warm but firm in that way that brooked no argument. "Baby girl, I raised you to be strong and independent, and I'm proud of that. But I didn't raise you to be foolish. Mom, you don't understand. I understand that you found a good man who loves you completely, and you threw it away because you were scared. I understand that fear, honey. After your father, I was scared too. Scared to trust, scared to be vulnerable, scared to let anyone close enough to hurt me." Diane Moore's voice softened. "But do you know what I learned? Being alone isn't safer than being loved. It's just lonelier." After hanging up, Selina sat in her darkened apartment, rain pattering against the windows, and forced herself to confront the truth she'd been avoiding for 3 weeks. She was in love with Adrian Smith. She'd been in love with him since that first night in Central Park, when he'd looked at her like she was the most fascinating person he'd ever encountered. She'd fallen deeper during their dinner conversations, their quiet moments in his apartment, their laughter over Mrs. Rossetti's matchmaking attempts, and she'd destroyed it all because she was terrified of needing someone, terrified of being the woman who gave up her independence for love, terrified of becoming vulnerable to someone who had the power to devastate her completely. But watching Adrian on television, seeing the pain in his eyes when that reporter mentioned her name, she realized something fundamental. She hadn't protected herself by pushing him away. She'd just guaranteed that the devastation would come from her own choices rather than his. The next morning, Selina called in sick to work for the first time in 2 years and took the subway to the Smith Industries building. The security guard recognized her and waved her toward the elevators, but when she reached the 42nd floor, Catherine's desk was empty. "Can I help you?" An unfamiliar assistant looked up from a computer screen. "I'm looking for Adrian Smith. Mr. Smith is no longer with the company. Can someone else assist you?" Of course, he'd probably cleaned out his office yesterday right after the press conference. Selina felt panic rising in her chest. What if she'd missed her chance completely? What if he'd left New York, started over somewhere new, decided he was better off without the woman who'd publicly humiliated him, and then disappeared from his life? "Do you know where I can find him?" she asked desperately. The assistant looked sympathetic but shook her head. "I'm sorry, I don't have that information." Selina spent the rest of the day calling every number she could think of. Catherine's phone went straight to voicemail. The main Smith Industries line couldn't provide personal information about former employees, and Adrian's personal number had apparently been disconnected. By evening, she was sitting on a bench in Central Park near the pond, where they'd had their first real conversation, watching the sun set through bare November trees and fighting the growing certainty that she'd lost him forever. "I thought I might find you here." Selina spun around, her heart stopping at the familiar voice. Adrian stood about 10 feet away, hands in the pockets of a navy wool coat, looking like he hadn't slept in weeks. He was still devastatingly handsome, still carried himself with that natural confidence, but there was something different in his eyes, something sadder and more guarded than she remembered. "How did you know I'd be here?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Because this is where we figured out that we could trust each other, and I was hoping—" He paused, studying her face. "I was hoping you might be ready to figure out what comes next." Selina stood slowly, her legs unsteady. "I saw the news yesterday. I figured you might. Why did you do it? Really?" Adrian moved closer, close enough that she could see the exhaustion in his features, the lines around his eyes that hadn't been there 3 weeks ago. "Because you were right," he said simply. "I was trying to solve your problems with money and influence, trying to protect you in ways that made you feel smaller rather than stronger. I realized that if I wanted to be worthy of loving someone like you, I needed to become someone who built things rather than just acquired them." "Adrian, I'm not done." His voice was gentle but firm. "I've spent the last 3 weeks thinking about what you said that day in Yanka's office, about how I can't just swoop in and fix everything with phone calls and connections. You were absolutely right." He took another step closer, and Selina could smell his familiar cologne, could see the hope and uncertainty warring in his expression. "So, I didn't come here to fix anything," he continued. "I came here to tell you that I love you. Not because you need me, not because I can solve your problems, but because you challenge me to be better than I was yesterday. Because you make me laugh, and make me think, and make me want to build something meaningful with my life." Tears were streaming down Selina's face now, hot and unstoppable. "I love you too," she whispered. "I've loved you this whole time. I was just scared." "Scared of what?" "Scared of needing you. Scared of losing myself in your world. Scared of not being enough when the novelty wore off." Adrian reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and when she didn't, he gently brushed the tears from her cheeks. "Selina Moore," he said softly, "you are enough. You've always been enough. You're brilliant and strong and independent, and the most beautiful woman I've ever known inside and out. I don't want to change you, or fix you, or make you fit into my world. I want to build a new world with you, one where we both get to be exactly who we are, even if I'm stubborn and proud and sometimes push you away when I'm scared. Especially then, because that's what makes you you, and you are what I choose, every day for the rest of my life, if you'll have me." Standing there in the gathering dusk of Central Park, surrounded by the sounds of the city and the rustling of autumn leaves, Selina felt all her careful defenses crumble completely. This was the moment she'd been terrified of and running toward in equal measure, the moment when she stopped protecting herself and started living fully. "Yes," she said, stepping into his arms. "Yes to all of it." When Adrian kissed her, it tasted like coming home, like second chances, like the beginning of something extraordinary. And for the first time in 3 weeks, Selina Moore felt like she could breathe again. "What happens now?" she asked against his lips. "Now," Adrian said, his smile radiant in the fading light, "we figure it out together. All of it. No more grand gestures. No more trying to solve each other's problems. Just partnership. Partnership," Selina repeated, testing the word. It felt right, felt possible, felt like the foundation for something that could last. "Although," Adrian added, his expression turning slightly mischievous, "I should probably mention that Catherine threatened to hunt me down and lecture me about throwing away the best thing that ever happened to me if I didn't come find you soon. Catherine's a smart woman, the smartest, which is why I hired her to help run my new company." "You hired Catherine?" "I told you I was building something new." I can't think of anyone I'd rather have helping me do it. As they walked out of the park together, hands intertwined, Selina felt the weight of the last 3 weeks lifting from her shoulders. There would be challenges ahead, integrating their lives, navigating the differences between their backgrounds, learning how to love each other without losing themselves in the process. But for the first time in her life, Selina wasn't afraid of the unknown. She was walking toward it with someone who loved her exactly as she was, someone who wanted to build a future rather than fix the past, someone who had chosen her not despite her fears and flaws, but because of the complete, complicated, extraordinary person she was. And that, she thought as Adrian squeezed her hand and pointed toward a small Italian restaurant with warm light spilling from its windows, felt like the beginning of everything. 2 years later, the coffee was still terrible. Selina smiled as she coaxed Adrian's ancient espresso machine into producing something resembling cappuccino, listening to the sounds of their Saturday morning routine unfolding around her. Adrian's voice drifted from his home office where he was on a call with a client in Portland, a mid-size manufacturing company looking to transition to solar energy. Catherine's laughter echoed from the dining room, where she was reviewing contracts while Silas attempted to explain the finer points of fantasy football. Some things, Selina reflected, were worth the learning curve. "Mum, are you burning breakfast again?" Selina turned to find Diane Moore emerging from the guest bedroom, looking rested and happy after her weekend visit to New York. At 62, her mother had finally learned to slow down, though she still worked part-time at the hospital and had recently started dating a kind radiologist who brought her flowers every Friday. "I'm not burning anything," Selina protested, gesturing toward the perfectly golden pancakes Adrian had started before his call. "I'm just supervising." Diane kissed her daughter's cheek, then stole a piece of bacon from the plate. "Where's that man of yours?" "Conference call with the Portland team. They're breaking ground on their new solar facility next month. And how's business?" "Good. Really good, actually." Selina couldn't keep the pride from her voice. Greenwave Consulting landed 3 new contracts this week, including one with a textile company in North Carolina that could be their biggest project yet. Adrian's company had grown steadily over the past 2 years, built on a foundation of genuine expertise and authentic relationships rather than corporate connections and inherited influence. It was smaller than Smith Industries had been, more personal, more meaningful, and Adrian came home every night energized rather than exhausted, excited to tell her about the projects he was working on rather than the deals he'd closed. "And what about you?" Diane asked, settling at the kitchen island with her coffee. "Any word on the promotion?" "Next week, hopefully. Janka says it's just a formality at this point, but—" Selina shrugged, trying to appear nonchalant about something that had consumed her thoughts for months. The promotion to senior partner at Richardson & Associates represented everything she'd worked toward for 7 years. Recognition, security, the validation that she belonged in rooms where important decisions were made. A year ago, it would have been the most important thing in her life. Now it felt like one wonderful piece of a much larger, more complex puzzle. "Nervous?" her mother asked. "Excited. It's different." And it was different. The anxious desperation to prove herself had been replaced by confidence in her abilities and trust in her worth. She no longer felt like she had to choose between professional success and personal happiness. They could coexist, support each other, make her whole rather than fractured. "You've changed," Diane observed, studying her daughter's face. "You're settled, happy in a way I don't think I've ever seen you." Before Selina could respond, Adrian appeared in the doorway, hair slightly mussed from running his hands through it during the call, wearing the old Columbia t-shirt and jeans that had become his standard weekend uniform. "Portland's a go," he announced, then moved to kiss Selina's temple before greeting her mother with a warm hug. "Good morning, Diane. How did you sleep?" "Like a baby. That guest bed is more comfortable than my own. Then you'll have to visit more often." It was such a simple exchange, so domestic and natural, but it filled Selina with a warmth that had nothing to do with the coffee in her hands. This was what she'd never quite believed she could have. Not just love, but partnership. Not just passion, but peace. "Catherine wants to know if we're still on for brunch at 11, Adrian said, checking his phone. "And apparently Silas has some announcement he's excited to share." "What kind of announcement?" Selina asked suspiciously. Her brother had been unusually mysterious during his visit, deflecting questions about his job at the tech startup in Atlanta, and changing the subject every time someone mentioned his on-and-off relationship with his college girlfriend. the kind that involves champagne, according to Catherine's text. They found out an hour later, gathered around a corner table at their favorite brunch spot in the village, that Silas had been accepted to graduate school at NYU and would be moving to New York in the fall. MBA program, he explained, grinning at the collective surprise around the table, focusing on sustainable business practices. Apparently, watching my sister's boyfriend completely reinvent his career inspired me to think bigger about what I want to do with mine. Ex-boyfriend, Diane corrected with a meaningful look at Adrian. Current something much more serious. Adrian's hand found Selina's under the table, his thumb tracing circles on her palm in the gesture that had become as natural as breathing. "We're working on defining the terms," he said diplomatically, though his smile suggested the definition might be evolving sooner than later. The conversation flowed around them, Catherine sharing updates about her son's first year of college, Silas describing his plans for the move, Diane telling stories about her new boyfriend that made everyone laugh. Selina found herself watching rather than just participating, storing up the moment like a photograph she wanted to remember forever. 2 years ago, she couldn't have imagined this scene. Her family and Adrian's chosen family, gathered around a table like they'd known each other for decades rather than months. Catherine treating Silas like the little brother she'd never had. Her mother offering Adrian unsolicited relationship advice with the casual authority of someone who'd claimed him as family. Adrian laughing at Silas's terrible jokes and asking genuine questions about Diane's work at the hospital. This was what love looked like in practice. Not just the grand gestures and passionate declarations, but the slow building of a life together, the integration of worlds that had once seemed incompatible. "Earth to Selina," Catherine said, waving a hand in front of her face. "Where did you go?" "Sorry, just thinking." "About what?" Selina looked around the table, at these people who had somehow become her chosen family, and felt her heart expand with gratitude. About how sometimes the best things happen when you stop trying to control everything and just let yourself fall. "Deep thoughts for Sunday brunch," Silas teased. "I'm a deep person. You're a sappy person," he corrected, "but it looks good on you." Later, after Catherine had gone home to prepare for the work week, after Silas and Diane had left for their flight back to Atlanta, Selina and Adrian walked slowly through Central Park in the late afternoon sunshine. They'd walked this route dozens of times over the past 2 years, but today felt different somehow, charged with possibility and the sense of standing on the edge of something new. "Penny for your thoughts," Adrian said as they settled on their usual bench by the pond. "That's inflation. Used to be a penny, now it's probably worth at least a quarter." "I'll pay the quarter." Selina leaned against his shoulder, watching a young couple nearby taking engagement photos, the woman laughing as the photographer directed them into increasingly elaborate poses. "I was thinking about time," she said. "How 2 years ago, I thought I knew exactly what I wanted from life. Good job, financial security, respect from my colleagues, all very reasonable, achievable goals. And now I realize that I was thinking too small. Not about the goals themselves, but about what happiness actually looks like." Adrian's arm tightened around her. "And what does it look like?" "This," she said simply. "Sunday brunches with people I love, building something meaningful together, having someone who challenges me to be braver and supports me when I'm scared, having a partner instead of just a boyfriend." "A partner," Adrian repeated thoughtfully. "Someone who's in it for the long haul. Someone who wants to build a future together, not just enjoy the present." "Selina." "Yeah?" Adrian shifted beside her, and when she looked up, he was smiling in a way she'd never seen before, nervous and excited, and absolutely certain all at once. "I love you," he said. "I love your intelligence and your strength and your loyalty, and the way you make me want to be the best version of myself every single day." "I love you too," she replied, though something in his tone made her heart start racing. "I love that you push me when I need pushing and support me when I need supporting. I love that you're building an incredible career on your own terms. I love that you make terrible coffee but perfect pancakes. I love that you argue with me about everything and make me laugh even when I'm frustrated. Adrian, I love that your family has become my family, and that we've built something together that's bigger than either of us individually." He was reaching into his jacket pocket now, and Selina's breath caught as understanding dawned. "Most of all," Adrian continued, pulling out a small velvet box, "I love that you taught me the difference between having everything and having what matters." He slid off the bench to kneel in front of her, opening the box to reveal a ring that was perfect in its simplicity. A single diamond on a platinum band, elegant and timeless, and absolutely right. "Selina Moore," he said, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. "Will you marry me? Will you be my partner, my best friend, my family for the rest of our lives?" Selina looked down at this man who had changed her entire understanding of love, who had chosen her not once but every day for 2 years, who had built a life with her, rather than trying to fit her into his existing world. "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes, of course, yes." The ring fit perfectly, of course. Adrian had probably enlisted Catherine's help to figure out her size. Another small demonstration of how well he knew her, how carefully he paid attention to details that mattered. When he kissed her, there on the bench where they'd had their first real conversation, Selina felt the same sense of rightness she'd experienced that night 2 years ago when she decided to walk with him instead of going home alone. "So," Adrian said when they finally broke apart, "ready for the next adventure?" Selina looked at the ring sparkling on her finger, at the man who had just promised to spend his life loving her exactly as she was. At the park around them where their story had really begun. "With you," she said, standing and pulling him to his feet. "I'm ready for anything." As they walked home together through the gathering dusk, Selina reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. She'd started as a woman who felt invisible, unworthy of being chosen, convinced that love meant losing herself. Now she was a woman who knew her own worth, who had been chosen by someone who saw all of her, strengths and flaws, fears and dreams, and loved her not despite them, but because of them. Sometimes, she thought, as Adrian squeezed her hand and pointed out a street musician they'd heard play a dozen times before, the most extraordinary love stories began with the simplest decision, to say yes when someone asks if you'd like to take a walk. 2 years later, she was still saying yes. And she planned to keep saying yes for the rest of her life. Sometimes the greatest love stories aren't about finding someone perfect. They're about finding someone who sees your imperfections and chooses to love you anyway. Selina and Adrian's journey reminds us that true love isn't about changing for someone else, but about becoming the best version of yourself alongside someone who believes in your worth. In a world that often tells us we're not enough, their story whispers a powerful truth. You are worthy of a love that chooses you completely, exactly as you are. What did this story teach you about the courage it takes to be truly seen and loved? Your participation means a lot to the channel. Please share your thoughts in the comments. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and comment your thoughts. Your participation is very important to us. See you next time.